Hello, Adam.
Hi, Kristen. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good, good.
So thank you so much for joining us. This is
Yeah, absolutely.
Empathy
My
in
pleasure.
Action, our interview series of local role models and leaders and individuals who are making a difference in the community. And obviously you're one of those. And uh, so,
Trying. We do our best. We all do, right? Yeah.
so if you don't know, this is Adam Sudmann. He is the market manager at the Salt City Market. And it's something you might know of as the big building that's going on downtown. And so to learn a little bit more about the market and yourself, can you share with us, what a typical day would have been for you when you were on that path that you thought you were going to be on with that map to opening the market,
Sure.
5, 6 weeks ago?
Sure. So the market is Salt City Market is a food hall and public market coming to downtown later this year, November this year. It's a building currently under construction. It's 4 stories. Top 2 stories are mixed income apartments. Second story, you're moving down, is a nonprofit offices. And my floor that I think about all day long and every night is a food hall and public market. So it's what that really is it's food stalls, sort of mini restaurants. There's about 8 of them. And these are startups. These are individuals that from our community that we spent a year sort of trying to find and then audition. And now I'm in this training process with everyone, getting them ready for opening day in November, whatever that looks like. So right now I'm my job before COVID was to cultivate these entrepreneurs, to motivate them, to connect them with technical assistance and support wherever they might need it. And you have to wear a lot of hats, opening up a restaurant. So it's a lot of different people I was surrounding folks with. And what we were preparing to do before all this was to start an event series in May. Just an event series where you have large groups of people packed into small spaces. I think we might not do that, or that might have to wait a little bit. And so one of the changes that we've had to make right now is I should say that I come from events. My background is producing and directing events down in New York City. And I did that for almost 16 years. And the events that I love the most, that I always did the best at were, my sweet spot was sort of 400 to 1,000 people. I'm okay with events for 4 people. I'm okay with events for 10,000, but 400 to 1,000 was what I loved. And so my mind always goes to, let's have a big event. There's a problem, there's a crisis. Let's get a bunch of people in a room and we'll figure it out. So now we're trying to, pivot a little bit and say, how can we tell salubrious stories about these businesses, this market, this city, in this time, and without sounding sort of salesy or promotional or because I think when I see things come through like that in my emails or my social media, I'm very sensitive to how people tell stories right now. So we're trying to figure that out for each of these businesses, each of these individuals, for the market as a whole. I think at the same time, from a even broader perspective, we're doing a little bit of a pivot from the urgent to the important, right? Before this crisis, you had a lot of urgent things. This has got to be done right away. I need this in the next hour. But funnily enough, you look back on those urgent things and you can't really remember what last week's urgent things were, right? So this has been, in a weird way, a good opportunity to think about, like, okay, what are the important things? Because urgency is just the list of urgent things got a lot smaller overnight.
Yeah, or went away totally. Yeah.
Yeah, or is limited to certain sectors, right?
Right.
If you're in the healthcare industry, okay, you have some urgent things, right? If you're selling, if you're promoting foods and culture, you we're doing this pivot from urgent to important, which I think is a healthy pivot to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So share with us what you found important and how you're making it happen.
Yeah. So what we've what we found important is to identify who's being sort of pinched or hurt most by this crisis. Whenever there's a crisis, whether it's global warming, whether it's a health crisis right now, certain populations are going to be hit first, right? I thought about global warming comes to mind because I spent a lot of time in Easton, in Calcutta, areas around that. When the global warming, a few years ago, when the global warming debate was coming back, it sort of went dormant for a bit. It was coming back when I happened to be there, and it was during these seasons where you really felt like these massive cities that I was tootling around in are now going to have periods of time where they're underwater, and it really brought home to me that certain populations are going to be at the edge here when these massive crises hit, and you have to keep a lookout. And so we're looking at folks that are facing foods. We're in the food space. Our first thought was, okay, this crisis is coming. It's going to impact people's food security, right? We already have significant food insecurity in town. This problem is going to get worse very quickly. We also work with some powerful entrepreneurs who can produce food, really good food, in volume, because they've just had to do it for years and years. They also happen to be displaced by this crisis, those that were working in restaurants. Can we work out an arrangement where we essentially tap into that resource, get them an income during this period, but also use their considerable skills to produce lots of meals? So we've been doing that outside of the using the With Love restaurant over pretty close to where y'all are, over on North Salina, and working with Southwest Community Center. They're also producing quite a bit of meals through the Westcott Mutual Aid and some work with Beer Belly Deli, sort of pivoting their resources to this need. And then we've been pretty good at producing food. We're not so great in the distribution business. So we luckily have some really cool partners in the community that have come out and said, we'll distribute, whether that's Dunbar, I know, is going door to door for seniors. Peace Incorporated is, in all their locations and in all the neighborhoods have been really awesome at getting distribution done and doing it in a way that's safe, that's effective, that's efficient. The New Americans Forum has been great at that, both distributing but also sort of reporting back and saying, hey, this is great what you're doing, but we also have a need for this, and we also, can you hook us up with, a lot of folks have skills themselves and live a lifestyle where they produce a lot of food at home. Can you get us essentially a CSA drop worked into this? So so they're not just, those are folks that know how to work in the kitchen, that have that instinct, but they can't go to the grocery store right now. Okay, well, let's get you bags of CSA bags. So we're working that in. Yeah, so that's pretty much, that's a big part of what we're doing right now.
Yeah, well, and that's amazing. It's looking at what's needed most, what can I do, and making it happen.
Yeah.
That's what we have to do these days. And I love it when I hear the partnerships of different groups working together and making the whole structure work. So not only making the food, getting it out to where it needs to go, and getting the feedback to, does it need to go further, or does it need to change, or how do we make it better?
Yeah, and I would say that everybody's super eager for this because, I don't know, pretty much everyone wants to be useful and wants to have meaning, right? And so lucky that we can do that.
That's right. Yeah, I say that all the time. If you find a purpose and find a way to serve, it helps to combat all that fear and things that you could be feeling right now. Yeah. So, you've already talked a lot about empathy, in between the lines.
Sure.
Can you share a little bit about maybe your strategy for incorporating empathy into anything that you're doing?
Yeah. I don't know. Probably works different. Different people have different strategies, right? What I feel like is, I don't even know if it's a strategy. It always feels like a reflex to when I, that sort of, when I stub my toe, I think about, okay, what's somebody else going through, right? And so with this crisis, with being stuck in your house, you know. And even the phrase "stuck in your house" is such a luxurious phrase to say, right? Because I know plenty of folks that are certainly not stuck at home. They have to be out there working, right?
Mhm.
Um, or my younger brother is stuck at home, but he's stuck in a apartment the size of the room I'm sitting in right now. 5 minutes, just outside of Elmhurst, Queens, just out of you know,
Wow.
the the ground zero of this crisis, and he's in the events business, and so he was the first one to get out of work, and he'll be the last one back into work. And so I guess I try to think about when what we're up against here, and relate that to what I hear of other people, what they're up against. Um, we, I have a weekly Zoom call on Mondays with all the folks that are going to be in the market, all 8 of them, and all eight of them are coming from. Everybody's struggling. Everybody's, but everybody has some things that are going for them, and some things that are going against them, and so it's constantly trying to relate my own um, hurdles and my own sort of like what do you call it? Just luck, I suppose. I have a house that I can walk from room to room, and that I can work from home. Trying to relate that to where, make correspondences in my head pretty much on a hourly basis with where other folks are at.
Yeah, it's interesting that when you said I stubbed my toe and I think of someone else. I mean, that's one of the things that I talk about in my empathy training, is that how difficult that is to do when
Hmm.
when you're yourself hurt or yourself feeling something that's
Yeah,
what's taking over. And
yeah,
how do you train yourself to move beyond that and think of someone else, because that's the cure. That's the cure to take away any of your own hurt. If you start thinking of someone else, it just goes away. But it's an interesting that you say it as a reflex, because it's an automatic for you, whereas with a lot of people it does take some training or some thought or some intention to get to that point.
yeah. I
Yeah.
think we're social creatures, and so whether it's, and I think empathy a lot of times gets framed as feeling sorry for people. Um, I think empathy for where people are struggling is good, but I think it's got to be balanced out with empathy, for me anyway, of where people are celebrating and where people are having
Right.
an awesome time too.
Right.
Um, I think it's so often framed in one direction.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think it's a line from King Lear or something. Is it King Lear, Macbeth? Anyway, about, or maybe it's Hamlet. I think it's Hamlet, about the toothache, and if you have a toothache, the rest of the world disappears. That's the
Right.
only thing that exists, and it's so easy to get into that space. But working on making those correspondences happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing going back to that empathy training is learning someone's story. So I find that interesting about coming up with the stories of the chefs. And I almost wonder, Mr. Rogers says, you can never not like someone once you've learned their story. Or I probably really messed up that quote, but it's something like that.
Yeah.
And, learning about someone is one of the keys to connection and empathy, because, someone who you think you have nothing in common with, or you have, preset notions about, once you start talking to them and learn about them and learn about where they came from, or maybe what their dreams were, things like that, you automatically have a connection. And that's where empathy starts. So it leads me to wonder if, I'm sure you have an answer to this, is that if you know someone's story and then they cook for you and you taste their food, does their food taste better?
Oh, I think, let me put it this way. Okay, I'm going to answer that in a couple different ways, right? Um, I look at food because I've been working in food and culture now for a while, right? I think that I'm most interested in food, not so much the taste of food, but food as a bridge. I think that knowing somebody's story doesn't usually precede the food. The food's the sort of the way in.
Okay.
So that's how I've tried to use food over the last few years, right? Um, uh, At the same time, does it taste? I think it. I will say, like, so I've tasted food in folks' homes, a lot of people's homes, particularly on the north side, dozens and dozens and dozens of people's homes, right? Somehow, when the food, I've tasted foods at people's homes that have been really great, sometimes not so great, sometimes pretty good, most of the times, oh, that's good. It always tastes better when we have the events. So when I went for someone's home, whether it was, even if it's fantastic in their home, it was mind blowing at the event. So I'm not sure why that was. And I think, and when I reflect on that, like somehow when we had these events for 400 or 500 people in a room, that was adding something, right? That you had it wasn't just, it was food, it was community, it was conversation. So I would say in general, I'm not as interested as I used to be in food isolated from all other sort of correspondences, right? I like the conversation. I like the conviviality of things. That's not to say, like, I was in Mexico City last year and I ate a lot of food without talking to anybody, right? I just ate a lot of street food and some of that food was mind blowing and so good. But for the most part, I like all those other sort of social
Yeah.
accoutrement, to the food. So when you layer in story and community and what someone else, just other tidbits about someone, I think it makes the food a lot richer, you
Yeah.
know. And you have these sort of correspondences, and then people aren't so isolated and woven in. Like, to give you a random example, a friend of mine, she's from South Sudan, right? And she knows her own food, but she's not really conversant in a lot of other foods. But I ran into her a few months ago in the back of this Vietnamese grocery store, and she was having basically hunched in the back, like grabbing a quick meal. And I was like, "Oh, you're eating Vietnamese food?" And she's like, "Yeah, I've gotten more, since the party. Now I'm sort of seeing what else is around." And something about that made me, made her food, made her story, made everything more sort of resonant for me. That's really going nowhere. I'm not sure what that means, but
No. But,
that's where I took the question.
it makes me think that doing a performance with no audience is so much different than doing
Mm,
a performance with an audience.
yeah,
So there's got to be something with all of that connection that's going on and the feedback that you're getting and stuff like
yeah,
that definitely makes the performance better and probably makes the food better. And, the whole
sure,
experience is enriched by that. And you're
yeah,
seeing that today so much with people, you know, TV shows and things like that, people trying to do performances with no audience. And it's like, boy, I thought they were funny. and maybe it's the laugh track. It's an interesting thing
yeah,
to be paying attention to these days, but I love the idea of putting the stories out in some way about them, especially during these times since we can't go out and get to know them. Let's see what we can get to know prior to going in and then have some kind of connection before we walk in the door. So I do like
yeah,
that.
yeah. We're social creatures.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Adam, anything else you'd like to share with us or like us to know before we end this interview?
Um, the only other thing I'll just add, I'm just going to double down on this empathy as uh, feeling sorry versus feeling pleasure. Um, I'm in the pleasure industry. I came from the luxury industry in New York City. I was in it's maybe kind of gross looking back on it, but I was in the business of sort of producing events to sell Bentleys and handbags that cost $40,000 and silly stuff like that. But it really was, it's sort of ingrained in me to sort of promote pleasure, right? So I'm always looking for, where is someone finding pleasure? Where is somebody finding something exquisite or joy or talent? So everybody I work with, I'm always looking for that. I try to not necessarily, yeah, it's good to, I think it's good and vital to look at, I stub my toe. What does it feel like what somebody else is going through, right? Um, but I think to sort of empathize up too is really important. Um, where's someone getting that pleasure? There's the one example that I think of is there's a family I work with from Somalia, and everybody was, I think the dominant narrative about Somalia is that's a place of suffering, right? You don't think of that as a place of pleasure. And so I was talking to this woman, Ayan, years ago, and she said, when we came here to Syracuse, we were so excited to find out about Christmas, right? And we'd heard all these stories. We thought, like, this is going to be mind-blowing. We didn't know what this Christmas thing was, right? And they said, it rolled around, and they said, this didn't, it was kind of it was a dud. She's like, Eid in Mogadishu. She's like, this is what Eid is like. And when she portrayed, what people were cooking, what they were sharing, the activity in the streets, I thought, like, wow, you got something special there. I want to go see that. That sounds like a celebration. That sounds like a town that's like thrumming, right? And I was sort of empathizing with my version of empathizing anyway. It was relating to her and feeling what she was feeling about that pleasure. So I think it's important to look for pleasure and not always have the instinct to look for suffering.
Right.
That's what I say.
Right. Where's your joy? How do you find your joy? And working with people we can't help other people find their joy unless we've found ours. So, there's a lot of looking, there's a lot of intention of where is the good. And, I talk a lot to people about what gifts are we taking from this? Because there are gifts that we are finding every single day that we can actually carry with us through this and be stronger afterwards because of things that are good even during this horrible time.
Yeah. I think that's hard to do consistently, but we got to keep at it.
That's right. You got to work at it. It's practice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. It's been great.
Oh gosh, thank you. Yeah.
And good luck with everything. And
we'll share a meal again. I know it.
Hope to see you at the market in November. Okay.
Thanks, Kristen. Be well.
You too.